Oh, good. We're live. Maybe. I don't see anything. There we go. Hey, good evening, everybody. Um, Matthew Moon here, just working on some drafts for my new TTRPG and generally setting up the stream. Let's see. Um, and radio check. It looks like you can hear me. Let me pause other stuff. Alright, let's see. Alright. Um. Yeah, so first time using YouTube live stream. If anyone shows up, go ahead and let me know what it sounds like, if it needs improvements, or if I'm anything sounding quite far off. But other than that, I'm just gonna work on excuse the allergies. Work on this for a little bit. So let's go back to the beginning. So this is Fables of Eternity. It's an RPG system that I'm creating. I have my major sources of inspiration, the basics. Every good game says what an RPG is, gives the definition of the roles, and character creation. So in this one, I'm going with 3 primary stats or attributes, or I don't know what we're going to call them yet. So there's body, mind, and soul. And then there's a 4th one, which is eminence, but that has more of like passive skill checks. Fables of Eternity is a 2d12 roll over system. So you roll 2 12-sided dice and you sum the totals, add modifiers, and you will check it against a target number. We have might, which is essentially like strength, agility, which is like your dexterity, your endurance is your constitution, logic is your intelligence, intuition and place in will, cunning is your ability to scope out advantages and achieve goals through cleverness, deceit, or skillful manipulation. Your soul attribute is primarily for magic. Excuse me. Magic and your spiritual defense. Again, it's primarily a magical influence. So I'm designing it around a character creation around a 20 question type of build, the kind of highlighted here. This is a very early draft. I've done a lot of revisement since then. Like right now I'm on version 1.8 of my drafts. So question 1, different races or species. I'm not sure what we're going to call them. Elves. Everything in this game is like weird fantasy. So you have elves that are like from stars. You have the humans. You have the Daewad, which are essentially dwarves. The Nephilim, which are giants. The Afridi, which are your genies, your elemental races. The Tritons are your water folk. Gearforged are your constructs. Tengu are your birds. Orcs, changelings, and the Tainted are all of the half-bloods. So your werewolves, your minotaurs, your catfolk, etc. question 2 is where was your character born? So the way we're doing ability scores over here is essentially, instead of just starting with 10 like in a lot of common games, or 8 or whatever the system might be, you start at 0 and then you apply it on a step-by-step basis. So like the first step, you would have your elves, or let's do humans, that's the most straightforward one. They start with 1 in all of the attributes. Then you pick which city you were born in. There's 12 major capitals in the world of Sakai, and then there's a 13th one, which is story-wise it's a mystery, but for mechanical-wise it's the build your own custom lineage style. Then you have classes. I'm calling them characters call-ins, so it's a little more dynamic than regular class. So right now we have the Diabolist, the Envoy, the Justicar, the Mercenary, the Vagabond, the Knave, the Warden, and the Cerberus. Next up, you go through a series of questions. Characters, loyalties, past. What are they known for? What your character think of honor? Advantage, quirks, and flaws, which are basically like traits. You have a couple other questions to help build out your character, and each of these adds various different attribute points. So like what people notice first, and it gives you some descriptions, and it's basically going to add 1 to any of the ability scores. How does your character react in stressful situations? Again, there's essentially 1 for every ability score, so it's an extremely flexible system. However, it builds it in from your character's backstory, so you can technically maximize the stats as you want. However, you're going to have a story reason on why it looks like that. And then this is one of my favorite ones, is how should your character die? I think every character should know have an idea of players should have an idea of how their character should die, or transcend, or go on and basically retire in the character. Because while it is fun to play characters for years, it's even more fun to have the story conclude and then be able to start a new story. So kind of going through some of the call-ins, you've got how you read it, and this is all just built in a Word document right now. I don't have the layout skills required to properly establish this in like a PDF and make it all pretty, so that'll be a later step. Characters call-ins, essentially I do put in a complexity rating on the character from a mechanical standpoint. Some of them are going to be much more complicated in bookkeeping than some of the other ones. Your call-in dynamics is kind of your source of power. Is going to be like primal, arcane, martial, divine, and eventually there's going to be occultic, and there will be courtier, which is going to be like completely social based for a different campaign. Class fantasy gives you the standard idea, kind of what the idealistic or the stereotypical class is, or what they do. The complexity rating, the dynamics tells you which power type they're associated with. Vitae points, basically your hit points. You gain more at each level. It goes up with your endurance score. You can spend them for certain resources whenever you take a hit. As long as it's not a critical, you reduce your Vitae points. Basically, it's just the arbitration of hit points. Proficiencies, what type of weapons, so very familiar. The skills, so we have a class skill list, so each of them have a unique list of skills. For that you can put ranks into it, which we'll go over in a little while. Skill ranks per levels, how many you gain. On the example, so you've got your level. This game only goes from levels 1 to 10. I don't want to go to like 20, because playing other fantasy RPGs, They have it up though at the 20, but you very rarely, if ever, reach past 10 or 12. So may as well put all the cool features in kind of that middle range and accelerate a little bit faster. It also allows levels 1, 2, and 3 to be a little more interesting because you can more front load the class or the call-in in order to give this some more interesting features and not be just like this barely surviving and scraping by. Call-in talents. So talents are the class features. They will be limited to different power types. So there's going to be like an expert talent, primal talent, arcanum, and devout. That's what I called the holy, or the divine is devouts. The ribbon feature is something that every class gets. It basically is the cornerstone or the keystone to each of their call-in types. So that's going to be the one unique feature that no other call-in can acquire. At least right now, I haven't figured out multi-classing. You can increase your attributes. You can increase your attributes at 3rd, 6th, and 9th level. So despite what you start with, you can get a little bit stronger as you level up. Roles of a call-in in a combat perspective, they have different types. I have a little bit of a list that covers the call-ins, the mechanical difficulty, like roles in combat, and then comparable fantasy classes. So we'll kind of skip over these for now as most of them are not finished. You can pause and read them if you want later. Alright, running the game. So, ability checks. They're infrequent, but essentially it's going to be a straight roll with your whatever attribute the Fabler calls for. I have an advantage and disadvantage system. Very similar to most other systems that use it. Some call it Banes and Boons. Some call it high roll, low roll. Right now I'm just calling it advantage, disadvantage. I might come up with a more thematic name for this system. But basically, if you have advantage, you roll 3d12s and choose the two of them to keep. You can keep the lower numbers if you want to, which has certain aspects when we get to critical hits. But if you have disadvantage, you always take the 2 lowest results. So very similar to other fantasy style games there. An edge is a small advantage you have during a conflict. So conflicts are different scenes. So there can be skirmish conflicts, intrigue conflicts, which are going to be like your social encounters, as well as exploration conflicts. I haven't developed all those rules yet, but that's what we're going to be calling basically the encounters is going to be called conflicts. Prowess bonus. This is just your character's automatic progression. As they become more powerful, they generally get more skilled across the board, even if they're not specialized in something. You know, someone who's been adventuring for 10 years is just going to generically be better at any type of skill than at any type of adventuring skill than someone that's, you know, just coming out of school and hasn't had a life experiences. So prowess bonus is just a numerical advancement to help keep things balanced mechanically. Here we go to the types of conflicts. We got skirmish for our combat, intrigue for social, exploration, and then power. I added this 4th one here, this power, for when you want to have large scale scenarios, essentially. That could be the examples I have, such as armies clashes. So you can have, you know, large scale armies, diplomatic agreements between kingdoms, discovery of hidden lands, conflicts can have a significant impact on the world around you. And then here's critical threats. So because we're rolling 2d12s instead of a single d20 or a single other die or a d100, our criticals, instead of rolling on a natural 20, are going to be on doubles. So the percentage goes up from like 5% on our d20 to, I believe it's 8.45%. However, it makes it a little more intriguing because you can, whenever you roll doubles, you have both the chance of a critical failure or a critical success. So if you roll doubles and you exceed the target number, it's a critical success or critical hit. However, if you miss the creature or the target number, then it's a critical failure, which has different consequences depending on what type of skill you're using. For attacks, attack rolls, you can either deal damage directly to the target's wound points, once we get onto the next page, or remove all stress you've accumulated. If the target has no vitality or vitae points remaining, they deal ×2 damage. So essentially it accelerates it when they have no hit points left. Basically, you can finish them off faster. Attack bonuses, so the basic rolls, and this goes for everything, it's going to be 2d12 plus your ability modifier plus your skill ranks, your prowess bonus, any magic items, any additional spell effects, other modifiers. Very similar to most other generic rollover systems. And then moving across, so wounds are your actual health and bodily score. If your wounds are ever reduced to 0, your character dies. It's just is what it is. So there's not like death saves and any other features like that. If you take wound damage, it is significantly more difficult to heal without just time, as opposed to the vitae, which recovers quite quickly, usually after each encounter. So wound points reflect the character's bodily health, as well as how much physical damage they can suffer before needing immediate medical attention. When they reach 0 wounds, a character dies. Wounds are equal to your body score and can only be increased through talents or by raising your base body score. Creature's wound points are also modified based on its size. So I wanted to do an interesting change where a standard human, we'll say, has a body score of like 7 to 12. However, when I was using the system where it's your body score, because body scores also affect defenses, which we can cover in a little bit down at the bottom, I didn't want to have gargantuan, like let's say a dragon or a troll or something that's huge or colossal sized. I didn't want them to have a body score of like 45, because that would essentially make it impossible to hit them. So instead we changed that their wounds are modified based on the size. So if they have a body score of 12, which is quite high, especially for like mid to early games, and then they were a colossal dragon, they would multiply by 5. So they have 60 wounds, even though their body score is only 12. So that's kind of how we're trying to balance out larger, tougher creatures without completely throwing out the math that we developed for the defense system. As talked about before, vitae is your inner vitality and source of your physical and spiritual stamina. When you're hit by an attack, aspect, or other damaging effects, you reduce your vitae by the amount of damage suffered. Vitae can even be used as a resource to activate different abilities and aspects. I'll cover it a little bit later, but aspects are this game's version of spells. Once your vitae reaches 0, you start taking wounds in place of any further damage. So again, it's a trickle-down system. If you have 8 vitae and you take 12 damage, and you remove the 8 and then take 4 wound points in place of it. Kind of how most classes get a specific amount based on the call-in, plus your endurance score each time you level up. So defenses are a measure of how well you defend against different types of attacks and how much damage you can resist. That is actually no longer true, so it's just how you defend against attacks. Your physical defense is a measure of difficulty you are to hit, most often gained from armor worn. Mental defense is a measure of how well you can resist attacks and damage, and spiritual defense protects you from effects that attacks your soul and measures your resistance to corruption. So your physical defense is 8 plus your total body score plus your level plus any other effects, which would be talents, or it could be armor, it could be talents, it could be situational modifiers. Your mental defense, so this is like your mind. This is when someone tries to probe you or tries to read your thoughts or tries to use illusion against you. You go against your mental defense. So your mental defense, and all of the defenses are the same calculation. It's 8 plus your body, mind, or soul score, plus your level, plus any other effects that are applicable. I'm debating on whether I want to have a save and throw system. So primarily right now I'm trying to reduce the number of times a player has to roll to determine if they succeed on a task. So if we take like the most popular RPG out there right now, you can roll to attack, and then you rolled a hit, and then if you hit, then you roll for damage, and then you might have a secondary effect that triggers, and then the enemy gets to make a save and throw against it to cancel that effect. And I just think that's too much rolling. I'd rather be like, if you successfully achieve your goal, you get the effects that you want. So the whole save and throw is probably going to go away. I probably won't even have it. It'll be a straightforward, the effects will be more limited, but it'll be if you surpass the defense, then that effect happens. Conditions, just some basic conditions to help. Bleed, blind, burning, dazed, restrained, terrified, vulnerable, and weakened. So vulnerable takes double damage from physical sources, and weakened is double damage or half damage. You deal half damage with physical sources. I kind of like these because you can be weary from travel until you acquire the weakened condition, and then if you suddenly get into an ambush, you're going to be a lot harder to swing your weapons effectively, and other things like that. Statuses. So I'm gonna go back to conditions. So conditions are always negative. I want the system to be very specifically clear that conditions are bad. If you ever gain or give out conditions, it's always a negative feature. Statuses, on the other hand, are things that are basically telling you, well, it's just the status of you or of the enemy. So these are your bloodied condition, which is when you're half or less vitae. Critically injured is when you are below 25% or below half your wound maximum, and they do suffer disadvantage on physical actions and skills. So there is a bit of a spiral down, but it makes sense that if you're constantly being injured, you're going to be less good at fighting physically. And that's another thing I've always disliked is I don't want to run a true simulation game, but I want some simulation light aspects. So dying, a character with 0 wounds considered dying. That actually needs to be updated because at 0 you die. So I'll rewrite that. I gotta figure that one out. Hidden, well, characters hidden, enemies can only target them with area of effects or will adjacent to them. They're still visible on. So if you're using a combat map, you can, the miniatures or whatever you're using to track your characters, those stay on the map. It's just easier than trying to. I know some groups you take them off so you can't see them or enemies, but we are playing a game, and while your character might not be able to target them, it's easiest for both the person running the game and the players to know where the enemies are at. So it takes a tiny bit out of the verisimilitude. However, it makes it just the whole game run smoother. The following things are end hidden. So if a character uses a hostile effect, if they're attacking, if they cast and use an aspect, use anything essentially to target the hidden character or target someone who is not hidden, then you're no longer hidden. The hidden character ends any turn with an enemy's line of sight unless they're either invisible or benefiting from cover. So this is where it's more important when you're running on a grid. This one might be changed later. Or an enemy performs an observation skill against you. Basically, if they try to spot you, they can take an action to do that. Incapacitated, character cannot take actions and is unconscious, but you're not actively dying. Asleep, which, completely tied up, bound and gagged, knocked out. It's just incapacitated. Invisible status. So when a creature gains all the benefits of being hidden. So the benefits up here are they can only be attacked by AoEs. And then plus the following effect. When attacking an invisible character, that should actually be creature. You roll a d6 before the attack on a 1 to 3, the attack misses. Invisible creatures, so basically it's a 50-50 miss chance, even if they're adjacent to you. Invisible creatures are still visible on the map to players in the Fable are treated as being behind cover for the purpose of taking the hide action. Essentially, you can hide when you're invisible. A lot of the abilities I put in here, invisibility lasts until the end of the conflict unless otherwise specified. I'm trying to reduce as much bookkeeping on combat rounds. So, while I do like combat and fighting in the games, it gets very cumbersome when you have to track rounds of functionality of things. So, a lot of these abilities became slightly stronger. For most of them, just last until the end of the conflict, unless I specified otherwise. So like invisibility is just you're invisible until you either choose to end it, or they notice you and find you. Prone, if you're prone, your ranged attacks against you are made a disadvantage, and characters treat all movement as though it was difficult. Unless immobilized, the prone character can stand up in place of their standard movement and in the prone condition. Standing from prone does not provoke an attack of opportunity unless multiple hostile creatures are adjacent. Alright, so death and dying. So when a character is reduced, I said earlier that we don't have death saves, which is true, but you get 3 options when you are dying. So the first option is, you choose one of these options on the following list before falling unconscious. Strain the soul. Character's spirit is permanently reduced, gaining 10 corruption points, and you are stabilized but stop dying. Now you can go, someone can come up to you and kill you outright, but you essentially decide to this is the get out of jail card for the players. If they don't want their character to die, they can choose to pay a cost, which is gaining the corruption, and they just stabilize. Option 2 is leave it to fate. This is as close to death saves as you get. You roll an unmodified 2d12. If it's even, you're stabilized. If it's odd, you die outright. So essentially it's just a ones are done effect. And then heroic endings. So if a character chooses this option, they do not fall unconscious, and instead immediately take an additional turn after the creature that caused their dying state finishes its current action, interrupting the normal initiative order. During this turn, all actions are considered critical successes, so they no longer need to roll. They just automatically get a critical success, and the character cannot take damage or be incapacitated in any way. They also ignore any levels of enervation, which is my exhaustion mechanic. When the turn ends, they immediately die, ignoring any effects that would normally keep them alive, such as death saves or spells. We don't need that, because we don't have that. So I like this function because this is like, I'm designing this kind of be, I don't want to say cinematic, but this is like in movies and books when the hero is, clearly gonna die, but they go out in a blaze of glory and they start, they can take out all the enemies with them and do a bunch of stuff, and maybe depending on how your group is playing, you stay alive long enough to pass on a few words before dying. So this is a very player-driven choice of, if they think it would fit the story for their character to die, they can basically guarantee success of the conflict. And then the biggest thing is the effect is only for characters and unique enemies. Normal foes of the character's fight are simply dead at 0 wounds. So I don't want to have all these minions being tracked at 0 wounds and stabilizing and not. It's just NPC monsters, creatures, if they hit 0 wounds, they die outright. They don't get a choice. They don't get to do heroic endings or leaving it to fate, and they just are gone. So innovation is essentially an exhaustion mechanic. Levels from 1 to 5, with level 5 indicating near death state. If you ever get to 6 levels of exhaustion, you just outright die. All these effects are cumulative. So the first level is creatures have advantage on attacks against you. Level 2, you have disadvantage on all body and mind skill checks. Level 3, fatigue sets in and now takes 2 actions to change zones. Or if you're using a grid, the speed is reduced to 2 spaces. Level 4, you can only take a single action on each of your turns. And level 5, you're on the brink of death. Basically, you fall unconscious, and then The Fabler rolls a d4 in secret and notes the number, and that's how many rounds you have before your character dies if they're not stabilized. So the goal of that one is to give all the other players a sense of urgency, because they will not know if you have 1 round or 4 rounds before you die. So they need to find a way of stabilizing your character if you fall unconscious from enervation. And then very simply, stacking rules. Bonuses, nothing stacks. The only thing that applies is the highest bonus on pretty much everything. So conditions, powers, aspects, abilities, and arcane items, you only take the highest level. So we're not going to have like a +1 and a +2 and a +3 from 3 different things. You'll just have that +3. Kind of helps simplify some bookkeeping. Skills. So skills is the core mechanics of this game. Everything in the game essentially is a skill check. So like some of the other systems or older 3.5 and stuff, skills are, you can buy ranks into them as you level up, and then you add your attributes, and you have, let's see, did I put it in here? I did not. You can buy ranks, you put your attributes, any miscellaneous modifiers, and your prowess, and everything in the game is based on skills. Your attacks, your social skills, your spells. So the spell rolls, which are called aspect checks. There are attack rolls for whichever weapons, melee and ranged at the moment. And you're going to use your skill ranks there. So skills is the entire core of the system. So we don't have base attack bonus or anything like that. The idea is to be as flexible as possible while still curating a theme for the character. So the list of skills, I tried to be not necessarily as broad as possible, but I wanted to get encompassing skills that also had some unique flavor, and there was a large selection so that players can be customized how they want. So there's acrobatics. It's generally for acrobatics, escape artist, flying, riding a mount. Alchemy, potions, brewing, crafting potions. Astronomy, astromancy, like stellar navigation, predicting celestial events, harnessing star power. There's athletics, there's jumping, climbing, swimming. There is carousing, which is gathering rumors, influencing crowds, blending in, and partying. Yes, that's a party skill. Composure, used to resist effects of demoralizing, antagonizing, and social combat. It can also be used for just generally your character's composure in the situation. So if someone insults you, in theory, you can make a composure check to not burst, outright or fly into a temper. Crafting, very basic, all your crafting skills. Engineering, designing structures, repair mechanisms, analyze weaknesses. Forgery, create counterfeit documents, imitate signatures, forge items. Gambling is a skill. Essentially, it lets you a mix of chance, reading opponents, and cheating to earn money when you play it against the house, or you can gamble against other players or NPCs. Influence, I decided to include combine. Previously, a lot of games have like diplomacy and intimidation and bluffing as separate skills. I combine them to make them a little bit simpler and a little bit broader. So influence covers everything that you do to try and change someone's, basically, if you're trying to convince someone that you're right, either by lying, persuading, or intimidating them, it's all going to be under the influence check. Investigation, analyzing evidence, reconstruct events, interrogate suspects. Meditation is used for removing stress and other specific features, as well as if your character is simply like a monk, maybe you can meditate. So there is some aspects of just flavor, but then it also has has mechanical bonuses. Medicine is the healing skill. You use it to administer first aid, medical applications, knowledge about medical conditions and poisons and diseases. Natural, unarmed, is going to be the attack skill if you are punching, headbutting, kicking, or animals' natural attacks, bites, claws, tails, wings, etc. So essentially, if you're planning on playing the monk, or any kind of unarmed fighter, you would invest skill ranks in the natural unarmed as opposed to weapon skills, which is on the next page. The nature skill, it's knowledge of nature, wildlife, geography, and dungeoneering ability to handle and work with animals. Observation is your perception from sight, smell, or hearing, and also sense and motive. So, observation, again, I combined your normal spot checks with the sense motive because you can observe twitches, you can observe body language, you can observe, small tells on when a person's trying to lie to you. So, observation is used both for physically seeing something and for just that gut sense of if someone's lying, which is why it uses intuition as one of your base skills. Occultism, knowledge of the outer planes, myths, legends, rituals, and forbidden aspects. It also has a hidden aspect, basically a hidden magical power behind it. Performance, disguises, physical performances. So this will be your dancing, your singing, your whatever you want to basically use, but it also includes disguising yourself to disappear someone else. So instead of having a separate disguise skill, it's rolled up into the performance skill. Politics, debating policy, manipulating power dynamics, and building alliances. This is for the social. Politics is very specifically for the social verbal duel system that we're working on, where you can essentially beat someone down with your words. So anyone who's playing that pacifistic character has an option and a way of resolving conflicts without violence, usually. Religion skill, knowledge of core planes, religions and other practices, and deities and demigods. Society is navigating bureaucracy, understand customs, influence opinions, knowledge of history, local nobility, and linguistics. So again, I took a lot of the comments. So a lot of this is commonly or heavily based on old 3.5 edition games. So where they had all these separate knowledge skills, I combined a lot of them into smaller skills to make it a little bit more condensed. So like society covers your history, local nobility, and linguistics. Spellcraft, pretty self-explanatory. It's knowledge of arcane aspects, spellcraft, and use of magical devices. Stealth is being sneaky. I might change this because I don't like the name stealth that much, but I'm not sure. I don't want to use like trickery because that doesn't really work, but it might work. Actually, I have trickery down here, so I can't use that. Survival, finding food and water, making traps, placing traps to initiate ambushes. So this is something I'm excited to work on, is initiating ambushes. It'll be a option to set up before skirmish conflicts. So essentially be able to use your survival skill to give yourself a bonus on that first round of combat if you set up an ambush and then successfully passed whatever the target number was. Probably the opponent's observation would be my guess. I haven't flushed that out. Tactics used to aid and enhance allies' combat effectiveness. So both from a social aspect, you could be playing the general, the warlord, who's telling, the king here's how to lead your armies, and it can come all the way down to you on the battlefield and you you yell at your ally that they should flank the enemy. So it has a lot of mechanical benefits that essentially are all to aid allies, as well as some political aspects on the power scales. Taoism is essentially a different form of religion. It's going to primarily be it'll primarily have a spell-like effect. I have trickery, which is your sleight of hand, disabling devices and traps, and pickpocketing. So it kind of works with stealth. And then we have weapon skills melee and weapon skills ranged. Basically, it's use of weapons in melee, such as swords, axes, hammers, and polearms, and use of weapons at range, including bows, crossbows, and thrown weapons, etc. So that's the list of the basic generic skills. As we kind of go in here, there's a little bit, each of them has descriptions. So like this is the, so if we look at gambling, if you gamble against the house, this one is assuming if you take a full night of gambling out around town, you make a single check, you tally the total, and that's how much of your stakes that you win for the night. So it's a very simple system, but I think it adds a lot of depth and fun to the game. Of instead of just being like, I'll make I can't think of the term, a profession check. Instead, it has an actual skill, and then a way of playing against other NPCs or other characters. Your influence allows you to persuade or coerce another individual or group to do your bidding. I do have some modifiers depending on how much they like or hate you. You can perform other tasks such as antagonize them, demoralize them, or attempt to parlay. Investigation, medicine, meditation. So these are all the skill just descriptions. Go through it. All right, so aspect skills. So this is the magic system of the game. Very rudimentary right now. I'm still completely developing this. But essentially aspects, each of these has its own skill that will be, you'll have to put ranks into it, and you have to purchase specific magical talents, essentially magical training, in order to learn these skills and be able to use and evoke the aspects. But they're processed they're completed like any other skill check. It's 2d12 plus relevant ability plus prowess, skill ranks, other modifiers. But this one is, there's a target number set by the aspect or the defense score of the target, whichever is higher. So if you're targeting someone with, say, a firebolt, you would have to beat their defense even if the target number to successfully cast the spell was a 10. If they had a 17 defense, you would have to achieve a 17 or your spell basically fizzles. So this is part of how I was getting away from having saving throws and not having everything having a one side, as much player facing as possible. So you just tell them the target number is going to either be the defense of the target, or the difficulty of the aspect, whichever is greater. If they get that, they get their effect. It hits the target, it puts them to sleep, whatever the effect might be. Let's see. So evoking different types of aspects. So this is what I'm saying by it's all a work in progress still. So we have, essentially, the idea originally was going to be, I didn't want to have like 400 different spells that all could be doing. So I broke them down into the 18 aspects. And then, so each aspect starts as a base of a touch with a very low DC. And then you can choose to change the effects to what you want. So if you want to increase the range by 1 increment, so if it goes from engage to near to far to, distance, you simply increase the target number by 5 every time, and then the vitae cost. If you want to make it a burst, so it affects all valid targets in the same zone, then it's much bigger difficulty. But you could have a healing spell that hits everybody in the same area, and so now all your allies are healed because they're all in that 30-foot radius or whatever it might be. Or you can do that with damage spells. All of a sudden you cast a fireball, so your fireball can become the healing spell. Additional targets allows you to kind of split it, so you can target 2 separate allies or enemies. Lines it's a little more difficult if you don't have a grid, but essentially it's just a line times the range. So if you wanted to do a line, you would you'd add +5 to the target number, and then how far do you want the line to go? So each increment, so you wanted to go far range, which is 90 feet. So it'd be 5 plus 10 more for the far range. So now you add a +15 to the check, and if the base was a DC 10, you had to achieve a DC 25 check. The runes The rune application is you can place an aspect effect on a surface and set a trigger to have the effects go off. You can create booby traps. The sphere is your permanent spheres, so they're gonna stick around. They act as a creature in the zone and affects all engaged targets. So basically, it's a 5-foot emanation. It affects anything it touches, but you can maintain it and you can keep it around as long as you want. Then there is defensively, which is you don't suffer disadvantage when invoking it on an aspect while engaged with an enemy. So right now, you have disadvantage if an enemy is adjacent to you because they're trying to hit you. You're trying to use hand gestures and words to evoke these aspects. So baseline, you have disadvantage. However, you can choose to do it defensively, which allows you to not have the disadvantage, which is going to be a very important tactical decision. And then I'm experimenting with some other options. So like different aspects have a different effect. And this is the list. So we have augment, control, creation, energy, fear, gravity, inspiration, evoke, illusion, luster, power, protection, restoration, revelation, ruin, severance, telekinesis, and telepathy. I decided to go, instead of going very specific things, I wanted to be a little more broad so that they can be expanded on in the future. So like, for example, aspect of augment. It basically lets you buff one attribute of your choice on a creature. In order to read, let me find a better spell. Here we go. In order to read it, you have your result, your skill check required, the effect that it does, the tier that it is, and then the vitae cost. So the result is, the minimum target number you have to achieve to get what you want. So like atrophy, it's a hex spell. It reduces the foe's attribute of your choice to 0. The base is 10 plus all of the modifiers that you're adding back here. So if you're adding more range where it's not a touch, or if you want to have a burst, so that's where that one is the base of 10. Then the effect tells you what happens. The tier is essentially one of the determining factors of how high of a aspect people can evoke. So you have to have an attribute equal to or greater than the tier in order to cast it. So if you have a 3 on your, let's see, this one uses Maori. So if you have a 3 in this attribute, you can only cast up to a tier 3 of this spell. If you have a level 6, which is basically endgame, then you can cast the highest tier effect of it. And then the vitae cost. So instead of having spell slots, because I really, really dislike Vancian magic, I decided to go with it's a vitae cost to invoke the aspect. So essentially the evoker is channeling their own energy and life force into the spell. So the vitae cost is simply what you're going to spend when you attempt to evoke it, and whether you succeed or fail, you still spend that amount. I'm sorry, actually it is, if you succeed, you spend that amount. If you fail, there's a different calculation for failing to cast. But yes, you can fail to cast a spell, but every aspect has basically a very baseline cantrip, which is virtually impossible to fail if you're trained in the skill. However, everything has a chance. And then the costs go up significantly as you get to more and more powerful effects. So like here under aspect energy, you unleash elements to that's an old title. It allows the evoker to function as a conduit for the raw primal forces that course through the very heart of the natural world. You just unleash an energy type. So that you choose fire, lightning, or cold. Unleash a bolt of raw energy towards the target. Make an aspect. Oops, old wording. There you go. Skill check against the target's physical defense, and each of these will call out which defense they target if it's targets them at all. So against the target's physical defense, and consult the table below to determine the amount of damage that is dealt to the target. So essentially, you have TOs 1 through 6, and the damage almost exponentially increases. So if like you do tier 1, it's a DC 10 or the target's physical defense, whichever is greater, but you deal 1d4 plus 1 to a single target. Tier 2, you deal 2d4 plus 4, 3d6 plus 6, 48, 5d10, 6d12. It just scales up. But obviously the cost to you increases, so it's the vitae cost on these is the way that we're trying to balance the system so that you're not restricted by being able to cast a bunch of cantrips and first level spells, but you also can't just go around casting effectively 9th level spells all day every day. On average, a full caster at level 10 is going to have between 70 and like 100 hit points or vitae, so they can basically cast one 6th tier ability and then a couple smaller ones before they need to rest and recover. So each of these has a different little description. They all have a different effect. One thing that you'll notice is there is virtually no resurrection in this game. I don't like how a lot of games have it on a whim. You can just snap your fingers and the dead come back and there's no threat of dying. While I'm not running simulation, I do want the threat of characters dying. I think that adds to stories. I think it makes them more interesting, and it helps to invest the players. However, there will be an option for resurrection. So then we have what's called the forbidden knowledge. So the aspects listed here are those that have been lost or the study of them have been forbidden by all kingdoms in a uniform consensus due to the destructive nature or the dangers these skills could pose to the current plane of existence. For any caster to put ranks into one of these skills, they must first acquire the Forbidden Mystic's talent, and then must find either a teacher or a source of knowledge on each skill they wish to put ranks into. Each skill uses the soul or mind attribute of the character's choice. Once the choice has been made, it cannot be changed. So this is where you have there is resurrection, and this is where you have it, but so the aspect of eternity is like the first one, and these are like very core philosophical aspects more than anything. So you have eternity. I don't really have anything designed for it. And then you have the void, which is essentially you create a pocket of black hole. Basically, you summon a black hole, anything from a little moat all the way up to a black hole. We have the aspect of dreams, which is going to be like the top end mental illusions and controlling dreams and nightmares. This is where your stereotypical like shades and phantasmal killers would be. Oblivion, this is the promise. This is the way of resurrecting. The forbidden spell promises return of the deceased, but at a chilling cost. So I wanted to be cheeky, honestly, about what I do. So when you resurrect them, it has to be dead less than 100 years. This one is one of the few where you don't choose which tier you cast it at. So this one, you just make a straight forbidden knowledge check, and then you determine what the target number that you successfully got is. Also, you'll notice that the vitae costs are in the hundreds, which is part of the challenge here. Oops, something got mixed up. Let me get back there. There we go. So this is, like I said, this is very interesting because in order to resurrect someone, one, it's a 24-hour ritual or an 8-hour ritual, but there's massive drawbacks for everyone involved. So the first tier, the target is resurrected as a husk. All their attributes are permanently set to 1. This is the most basic. Basically, you bringing back a zombie. They have no consciousness. Effectively, they're mostly brain dead or in a vegetative state, but they are technically alive. Tier 2 is the target is resurrected insane, and all of their attributes are set to 3. So they have a permanent insanity, but they do come back functional. At the tier 3, the target is resurrected. They lose any spellcasting abilities and must relocate or any aspect skills. Oh, aspect. And must relocate. Essentially, when they were brought back from the edge or from death, they lost the ability to evoke them. Tier 4, the target is resurrected as intended. They suffer nightmares and must rest an additional day for each wound point that they recover. Number 5 is the target is resurrected as intended and suffers no apparent side effects. So this is like the best option. If you can kind of balance or weigh your roll to get right in that 30 to 35. And then 35 plus, or tier 6, is a beam from the beyond is latched onto the soul as you bring it back. The target is resurrected. All its attributes are set to 5, and you roll on the other worlds chart to see what is attached to the soul. So basically, you bring the creature your target back, but you also bring something else across the veil with it. So that can have a lot of really fun RP aspects. Is mechanically, it's just the strongest option, but it has a lot of storytelling elements. So then you roll a d12 if they got tier 6. A celestial is attached to your soul. You gain access to the special abilities that's in the stat block. Celestials are like angels, Empyreans. A daemon has attached to your soul, which is essentially, I don't remember what I described those as. I believe those are a daemon is the soul of a lost hero. So it's not a demon like the monsters from the abyss. It's a daemon, which is essentially a mystical hero or a spirit that has basically proven their worth. So they're demigods is a good way of putting them. Like Greek demigods. A primal is essentially a primordial creature, whether that's an elemental, a djinn, a bunch of other things, but it's a primal or primordial creature. And then an aeon is the highest, which is essentially minor deities and all the way up to some full deities, depending on how we build this. So they basically are actually taking place of your soul. And then the special, because this has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 600 vitae cost, no character will ever have that total. Instead, it takes all living things within a 1 mile radius, leaving a perfect circle of dead vegetation and beams. The spell drains the vitae first from the lowest living creature, then takes vitae from the stronger and stronger creatures until it has fueled the required amount. So essentially, when you cast this, everything within a mile, starting from the smallest thing that has a stat block, so like mice and spiders, those all start dying and then it goes up the chain until it starts killing, small creatures, large mammals, other humanoids in the area. Anything that's reduced to 0 vitae is instantly slain, and the spell will always take the vitae from the caster last. No, if there's no other living thing within the radius. Essentially, it's a super, super evil spell to use, which is why it's been forbidden. Even the most virtuous caster suffers immense corruption when they use this spell. Any caster that uses this spell receives 100 corruption points. So corruption is a work in progress, but essentially it's a light side, dark side tracker. Actually, it's such a dark side tracker. If you acquire more corruption than 10 times your soul attribute, your character essentially is lost. So this is almost certainly going to be a story arc spell only and not a player cast spell, unless they're basically willing to sacrifice themselves to bring someone back. And then the last aspect is despair, which I don't really have anything for designed right now. Now the exciting parts is talents. I'm thinking about calling them flares, but talents are basically your class abilities. So in the classes, they get a basic list of talents that they acquire at level 1. But after that, they only have the single ribbon feature. And the cool thing is you now get to purchase what class features you want. So if you want a barbarian that can, smite, you can purchase the Smite talent, and then you still have to invest ranks into being able to cast it effectively. But you could have a barbarian that, and this is also my way of fixing multi-class. So I'll take a look at this. So like the basics is Evo aspect or is allows you to train in these 4 element or aspects. So that's like basically your magic casting one. And you have the forbidden. Where was it? Yeah, so like devout here, sacred smite. You make a religion check and you check it against the chart, and that tells you how much damage and how much retake costs. So if you wanted to play, a barbarian and then cross train and purchase the sacred smite talent, you could do that and then go back and purchase more of your regular expert talents like your second wind and your adrenaline rush, or your improved criticals, your assassinate features, your evasions, uncanny dodges. A lot of these names, when I first drafted this up, I just was kind of going off of familiar terms. A lot of these will be renamed in a later point. So you've got like your favorite enemy. You choose a creature type: weirds, beasts, empyreans, primordial constructs, monstrosities, dragons, fey, or plants. When you're making an attack action, so when you're using the weapon skill or natural unarmed, you get a +2 miscellaneous bonus to your rolls. And then there's also some of these also have essentially skill trees that are built in. So your favorite enemy goes to Giant Hunter. So when you use a skill against a creature that is at least one size larger than you, you get an additional +2, stacks with favorite enemy. You then have Colossus Slayer, which is you choose a second creature type to add to your favorite enemy list. When you use a skill or aspect against your favorite enemy, a creature one size larger, you have advantage on them. And then there's Horde Breaker, which essentially lets you target all the creatures of that type within a range. So a lot of these will scale up, and basically it's a tree that you can purchase, or you can just buy one of the base level and then kind of go all the way and have the fantasy character that you want and the flexibility that you want. So we have general, which is for anyone can take. Over here, so each talent type is base cost. Let me go back to the beginning and explain this a little bit better. So the name of the talent descriptions, everyone has a power source essentially. So if you are a Diabolist and you have the Arcanum talents, you can take them from here, any of the arcane talents, for this cost, which is 1 talent point. Talent points, you gain a certain number at each level. Usually it starts with 1 at level 2, and then it goes up by like a few points every level. If you want to purchase a cross talents or something from a different power category or a different call-in category, it just costs double the points. So here, if you wanted to play a fighter, which is an expert category, and you wanted to purchase, the Evo adept, so you can put skills into these 4 aspect skills, it would cost you 2 talent points instead of 1. That's the current method of balancing, but other than that, any class can purchase talents from anywhere. And that goes back to my barbarian with the sacred smite functionality. Over here on experts, like I said, we have your second wind, adrenaline rush. You have your improved criticals, and not all of these are combat either. I really wanted to not have it solely based on combats only, like a lot of systems are. So we have ones like here, ear for deceit. You have a knack for detecting when someone's trying to deceive you. You gain a +2 in observation checks to determine if someone is attempting to deceive you. If you have 5 or more ranks in observation, it becomes a +4. There's a lot of these are unfinished, but fast hands, it's a quick draw functionality. We went over favorite enemy. Let's see. Like some of these things, like Shadow Dodge, it's a 3 cost ability, so you won't get it till level 4, I believe, maybe level 5. But while you're in shadows or low light, you advantage on stealth checks and attack some opponents that are not engaged, which is adjacent, with you have disadvantage. So that one can be used in or out of combat, which I like. Or Iron Mind, you just increase your mental defense by 2. Some of the other things, so we've got general talents. So like dedication is you increase one of your attributes by 1 to a maximum of 6. This is one of the 2 current ways that you can increase your attributes from your starting point. The other ones is level 3, 6, and 9, and then you can take dedication, which is a significant cost. It might be undercosted still. I haven't tested the cost of all of this, but essentially this is one other way of increasing your ability scores. So magically adept, so this is the base tier of all magic casting. So you have to have essentially every other skill requires you to have this talent, which is why it's under general. And it allows you to use these skills, which are basically all your mind skills. And then everything from there on, each other profession or each other power source has the a specific set of talents for their skills. Some other things that are like, again, like non-combat. So professional, you choose 2 skills. They become call-in skills for you, and you gain 2 skill ranks, which you can spend in them. Just a way to basically purchase additional skill ranks. Since the whole system is built around skills, it's a way of being flexible and expanding your range. Skill expert, you gain a +3 in a skill of your choice. This is one of my funnest ones, dramatic entrance. Once per session, your character can spend 2 edges, which normally would just allow you to re-roll like inspiration, but certain talents allow you to spend them to have some cool effects. Once per session, your character can spend 2 edges to interrupt the current conflict if they are not present and immediately enter at an opportune moment, no matter how unlikely their arrival. This is the Han Solo arriving at the Battle of Endor at the last opportune moment. Like, this is quite literally what inspired that one, was that scene. So I really like that. And then of course I built it up so that it has a couple different options. You can go more and more extreme and wild and just over the top hilarious. So also at the start of the show, where you basically get a free action when you use it, and you can use performance in place of any non-aspect skill during the action. So if you wanted to, this is a level 3 one, but essentially you could opportune show up, make it a free attack, and get to use your performance skill because you're dancing or you're leaping through the window as part of the action instead of using a weapon skill. So it's just a lot of fun there. Some other things, like I said, a lot of these are going to be based on non-combat features, or at least have a non-combat application. So like Jack of Many Trades, you add +1 to all non-mysticism skills you use as long as you do not have ranks in it. It's a jack of all trades. Essentially, and you gain an additional +1. So this one I need to heavily scrutinize. I think it's going to be too cheap to basically take no ranks and skills and just get +1 in all of them, but I need to reevaluate that a little bit. Some other things, a whole bunch of unfinished. So primal, this is your wild magic, your druids, your nature wardens, all of that good stuff. They get a different version of a smite that lets you hinder in your foes. They have the primeval adept, which is the augment powers, the revelation, the protection, the severance. So essentially the Diabolist is the wizard. They get to learn any of the aspects simply from their ribbon feature is they basically get these at no cost. But if any other class wanted to take these skills, they'd have to spend 2 points to purchase the primeval adept if they weren't in the primal, which currently is only the Cerberus or the druid. They have their own version of the favorite enemy under the yokais, so they deal more with like the spirits. Thousand Faces is something where it's essentially a purely non-combat feature, but it lets you create intricate disguises that are near indistinguishable from the real thing. A couple other options, you've got like banishing conditions, you've got advantage against different creature types, so they have different empathies. So there's lycanthropy empathy, I believe there is it's earlier on, but there's basically an empathy for each creature type, which just gives you advantage on all skill checks whenever you interact in a non-violent manner. So this is going back to, this is for the skill checks, this is for the RP, this is for the, you know, the non-combat situations. Maybe you're trying to heal them, maybe you're trying to convince them to leave you alone, so there's an empathy for each creature type, which I thought was very fitting of the primal aspects. Quirks, claws, and feats. Quirks, flaws, and feats. So these are granted during character creation. Currently, there is no other way of acquiring them. I'm working through some of these, or a lot of these still, but the most of them are going to be just descriptive with a very minor effect. Some of them are major. So, like, let's see. We'll go with favor though. So you've earned the favor of a high-ranking individual, such as a senator, a general, a merchant lord. Whether you saved their life or prevented a significant loss, they owe you and will help you with a minor favors as long as it doesn't cost or risk them much. So this is definitely more of the Fable of Fiat. You can kind of work with them, but then once during the campaign, you can request a significant favor that could incur a serious cost or a risk to them. So maybe you're friends with a general, or you saved a general's life, and now you're trying to negotiate, you know, a political struggle, and you reach out and be like, you're going to get the general on your side in this supposed coup that you're trying to plan. It's a significant risk to them, but, you know, they basically owe you a debt. Afterward, the trait is lost and the debt is considered repaid. So this is one of the interesting ones where you can actually lose this trait, but you can also get it in the story. So the trait can be earned after character creation through specific story events, and you can gain it multiple times, but only one instance of it at a time. So this allows you to, this is one of the only ones I believe that lets you can lose and gain. So the other one's like outlaw. You belong to an illegal network, like a thieves guild or data brokers. Once per game session, you can call on a contact for a mundane task like gather information or arrange in safe passages. If the tasks put the contact at higher risk, they will still do it, but may ask for a similarly risky favor in return. So these are just kind of some ways of flushing out your backstory and still giving you mechanical benefits. And then we have flaws, which are the inverse, of course. So these are things that are hindering you. So like the addiction flaw, be it the allure of gambling, the euphoria of substance, or the immersion of virtual escapism, you have a powerful fixation. This craving, whether physical, mental, or social, drives you to take risks and sometimes act recklessly to satisfy your need. You define the nature and intensity of your fixation, but when faced with your addiction, you suffer disadvantage on any check to resist the temptation. The biggest thing with flaws, besides just being building character, quite literally, is for every, I believe it's every 2 flaws you take, you can take an additional quirk. So you can have some penalties to gain additional benefits. And I think it's a limited of 2 additional quirks. So there's a whole bunch of different things, whether you basically have asthma or you're just socially awkward. I know I am. Maybe you're headstrong or you're just clumsy. You could be prideful, where you basically have to make a composure check. Or if someone hurts your pride, you essentially act abruptly, potentially throwing words or fists. You could have phobias. You could be peaceful, where you will refuse to do harm to any foe for the first 1d4 rounds of a conflict. Like, if you're not playing a combat heavy campaign, that has virtually no downside. If you're playing a heavy combat exploration game, that's a significant penalty. So a lot of these are weighted one side or the other. You could be gullible, you could have emotional disorders, you could be a literal thinker, you have the difficulty understanding figurative language. There's idioms and metaphors. You take everything at face value, often missing the intended meaning of phrases and expressions. So these are just good, basically, keystones on how your character's behavior and how they act. And then the last thing is the feats. This will be very much traditional like all the other systems feats. There'll be a small mechanical benefit, and you'll purchase these like kind of like you do talents, but a little more frequently. Combat. So, well, I don't want the system to be solely combat based. I do acknowledge that combat requires the most rules in any game. Big things. We run on an action point system. This has become a new trend I know recently. I believe Pathfinder 2nd Edition is one of the earlier ones that I know of. I know DC 20 is setting it up, which I think is a fantastic system overall. I really like the flexibility it gives you. So you get 4 action points, and you can spend them. Pretty much everything you do costs 1 action point. Some aspects cost 2. You can use action points when it's not your turn, as long as it's an interrupt action. It's a reaction or a readied action. And then they're recovered at the different rates. So the way you get action points back is at the end of your turn, you regain your 4 action points. You pay any upkeep costs, which are primarily right now just through aspects. Some talents and call-in features might change. You apply any other end of turn effects, and then you proceed to the next turn. So I'm going to read the example here. John ends his turn with all 4 action points restored. During the enemy's turn, one enemy moves out of John's reach, triggering his Fight and Spirit talent, which allows him to make a single weapon attack. John successfully hits. When it becomes his ally Corrine's turn, Corrine uses the Leader's Call mercenary ability, allowing John to make another attack as an interrupt action. John spends 1 action point to make the attack. When initiative returns to John, he has 2 action points remaining because he used 2 interrupt actions during the round. He decides to use these last 2 action points to move and make 1 final attack, ending his turn and regaining all 4 action points for the next round. So the way I like this is it allows you to essentially build or have your character act how you want them to. So you're not restricted to 1 attack, 1 move, 1 reaction. You could have your entire build, all you do is react to the enemies, and that's what you do, and that's how you build it. That's acceptable. There is a multi-action penalty, a map, which will come in during your turn. Essentially, if you use the same action, not just skills, but like the same skill multiple times, you suffer disadvantage on each one. So the next set of rules, we've got adrenaline. Certain abilities and effects can increase your adrenaline. Adrenaline builds up during a conflict and enhances your aggression. For each point of adrenaline, you gain a cumulative +1 to your body skill checks, which is going to primarily be athletics, acrobatics, weapon skills, and natural unarmed. For 1 minute, and you lose all adrenaline at the end of the conflict, or if you use the meditation to reduce your stress. Additionally, for every 5 points of adrenaline you accumulate, you gain 1 point of stress, explained below. Damage. This is a little out of order, but damage is basically like you would expect. There is necrotic, which covers acid, poison, and decay type damage. Cold, fire, force, thunder, or sonic. Slashing, which is a physical type. Bludgeoning and piercing, which are all 3 physical types. Psychic damage, umbral, so your dark, your evil, your death magic or death damage. Lightning, and then which is your electrical, and then radiant, which is your holy light or life magic or damage. We are playing with exploding dice. If you aren't familiar with exploding dice, whenever you roll the highest possible number on a die, you re-roll it and add the total together. So if you rolled a 6 on a d6, you'd re-roll another d6, and then if that also rolled a 6, now you have 12 plus the third roll, and you keep doing that until it ends, until you roll something other than a 6. It's a very strong ability. This is only on damage currently, so you can't like roll your 2d12 to hit and then roll a 12 and roll again. It's only when you roll in for damage, so it's a little, which is why it's under combat. Brief section just explaining how primary and secondary attacks work. Needs heavy revision, but basically if you're using 2-weapon fighting or multiple natural weapons like 2 claws and a bite for cats and creatures and beasts, they don't suffer the multi-action penalty. Instead, it just takes an extra action for each attack. So yeah, if they have a secondary or offhand weapon, you can make that other attack action and you don't suffer the multi-action penalty. Multiple action penalty: if a character chooses to take an action that they've already taken this turn, except for the move action, they receive disadvantage each time they attempt it beyond the first. So first time using an action is normal. Each additional time is disadvantage on the roll. It only applies to the same skill or non-attack skill. For example, if you have a weapon skill melee, you could also use influence or attempt to parlay. However, if you use a weapon skill melee and then attempt a weapon skill range or natural, you would apply the map. So that should be a little bit more clarified, but here's your actions in combat. Make an attack or use a skill in initiative. Move, defend with your shield, combat maneuvers, help another, hide, interact with an object, observe spellcasting, which is actually evoking, interrupt action, or verbal strikes. Alright, let's see. I am actually going to step away for a second and grab a drink of water because I am going to lose my voice otherwise. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Had to grab a cup of water. Let's see, where were you? Oh yeah, different combat actions. All right, speed and movement. So, well, in the Eternity 12 uses combat zones. If you're using a grid combat system, a character's speed would represent how many hexes they can move. This is based on a hexes system and not a square. But essentially, engaged means within 5 feet or 1 space. Near was within 30 feet, 6 spaces. So, well, we don't directly call it out. A space is 5 feet. Far is within 60 feet or 12 spaces. Earshot is within 120 feet or 24 spaces. And beyond is anything more than 120 feet or more than 24 spaces. This whole bottom part is needing to change. I'm going to rework the whole zone area so we can skip that. Shield bonus. Essentially, if you take an action to raise your shield and defend yourself with your shield, you add the bonus to your physical defense for that turn. Upkeep abilities. So upkeep allows you to maintain a spell or spell-like ability over multiple rounds, providing ongoing benefits until the character chooses to end it. Character can sustain a number of upkeep effects equal to the highest soul attribute. The epitome, anima, or maori. To maintain an upkeep effect, the character must spend 2 action points at the end of their turn. Immediately after regaining their action points, if a character does not spend 2, all main effects end. Typically, a character cannot end an upkeep effect before the end of the turn unless a specific skill or ability allows it. outside of combat. An upkeep ability lasts for 1 minute until the effect specified ends. Because we don't use action points outside of initiative, it just has a flat 1 minute last. Which, generally speaking, anytime you do something, if it's hostile towards a creature, you're going to initiate initiative. But if you're using it to like get across a chasm or something, then that's where that 1 minute or until this effect ends would come in. We have initiative. Excuse me. So, initiative is one of the slowest parts in any combat for every other game I've ever played. So, I've heard the term popcorn initiative tossed around a bunch, but in this one, initiative is triggered when an action requires time-sensitive resolution. So, whether a player or a Fabler declares a time-sensitive action, when either a player or the Fabler declares a time-sensitive action, initiative begins. This is most commonly going to be combat. However, there could be other, extringent circumstances, like maybe a bomb is about to go off, or someone got poisoned, and now we have a time-sensitive situation where people need to act in order before something bad happens. Turn order alternates between the players and the Fabler representing enemies or NPCs. Starting with the first character or group to act, then switching between the two until they have taken a turn. Instead of a fixed order, players decide who acts on their side, following the pattern player, Fabler, and so on. If characters have companions, like hirelings or beast companions, these act independently during the initiative, separate from the player's main turn. For the Fabler and non-player characters and groups of enemies, they can act in groups. For example, let's pose a normal combat encounter. There are 4 player characters: Count Valen, the vampire, 2 packs of wolves, and 3 unarmed minions with different stat blocks. Gerard, the fighter, interrupts the dinner conversation with Count Valen and attacks, starting the initiative order. He deals 7 damage in his turn. Now the Fabler chooses which enemy group will act next and decides on a pack of wolves, as they react quicker than the Count. After the wolves act, initiative goes back to the players to decide who acts next, alternating between players and enemies until everyone has taken a turn. If there are more enemy groups or players than enemies, once all of one side have acted, the remaining, I need to reword this, so once all of one side has acted, the remaining groups act in any order they want. So if the enemy had 7 minions or 7 groups effectively and 4 players, once all 4 players act, the Fabler can choose to act the last 3 in consecutive orders without going back to the players. In the next round, so in this is example, in the next round, Will the Diabolist sees the wolves grouping up and acts first, casting Fireball before they surround Gerard. After Will's turn, the Fabler has the minions rush him before Kyle the Justicar can intervene. So it adds a little bit more dynamic story element to going back and forth, instead of just being like, well, someone's got a plus 12 on their initiative score, so they always go first. If it makes more sense for the group to just strategically plan that, let's say maybe they want the wizard to go first, even though they're generally going to be the slowest, it might be the enemies get a first turn if they ambushed, but then on the player side, the wizard gets to act first, and maybe Diabolist, and maybe they decide to cast like a haste effect on all of the party members, and now everyone else has the advantage on their turn instead of having to wait a full cycle for the wizard to act independently if they were to go last normally. I know it reads a little weird, but it works a lot better that way. There's a whole section for intrigue and social influence in combat, social checks, and essentially, so social conflicts can be resolved either very simply where you just make a, you RP it out, you role play it out with the players, and you don't have to roll dice. But for those that want that more mechanical, ingrained rule system for it, we did develop one. The players, or the difficulty is set by the number, or set as a set difficulty. In this case, it's 8 plus their eminence score. So if we look over here on the example, when working against an individual, the target number of the conflict is the target's eminence score plus 8, and the number of successes needed is the highest mind before they fail a number of times equal to the lowest mind, minimum 1. In the case of trying to convince a group or collegiate, use the stats of the highest ranking individual. Or if there's no structured hierarchy, use the highest eminence character to determine attributes for the conflict. So this would be a social conflict. Let's say you're trying to convince the Lord of the Lands that you need to send aid to the border because goblins are invading. So the difficulty would be 23, which is 8 plus his 15 eminence, because this is a level 5, so a fairly mid-high level character. So the difficulty is 23, 8 plus 15. So this is the number that any skill needs to surpass. The players need 4 successes, which is the highest mind attribute, is logic, before they get 2 failures, which is the attribute of attrition or intuition. So most commonly, an intrigue conflict will be completed with social skills, such as carousing, influence, politics, and society. However, every skill could be used depending on the situation. For example, perhaps you're trying to convince a warlord of a powerful nomadic tribe, and a character wants to sway them with their impressive martial skills. The weapon skill melee or weapon skill range could apply. Or perhaps they're negotiating with the FoE and the character wants to use nature, spellcraft, or even trickery to speak in familiar terms to them or exhibit useful talents. All skills should be considered when doing intrigue conflicts, but not all skills will be applicable in all situations, and the Fabler has final say on what skills are considered applicable. So essentially, I didn't want to exclude, outright exclude skills, but they still got to make sense. So, let's see. Yeah, so anyways, in a round of intrigue. When a round of intrigue conflict is started, there are a series of steps to take known as the round. At the beginning of the round, each character will say what skill they are using to attempt to resolve the conflict. Multiple characters can use the same skill, if they choose. Once each player has chosen the skill that they will use for this round, they make the check against the target number of the conflict. That was that target number DC 23 for this example. The Fabler tallies up the total number of successes and failures and see if enough of one or the another have happened to resolve the conflict. If neither goal has been reached, then another round happens. All skill checks are applied simultaneously towards the resolution of the conflict. So basically, if you had 3 players, it's going to take a minimum of 2 rounds to succeed because they can only make 1 check per round. The difficulty of an encounter is also is modified by the effective character level of the foe they are attempting to engage. Basically, if you're level 1 party and you're trying to convince a level 8 Lord of the Lands, it's going to be virtually impossible because you're just peasants to them. Criticals. If a character achieves a critical success in the skill, which is doubles, and passing the number, they gain 2 successes towards the conflict's resolution. Likewise, if they get a critical failure, they get 2 failures towards the conflict's resolution. But there's a special rule: if a player scores a critical success, they can choose to either have it count as 2 successes, or they can have a single success and cancel out a single failure this round. The player's choice. But the decision must be made before the Fabler declares whether the conflict succeeded or failed. And generally speaking, when you're setting this up, you wouldn't tell them how many successes or fails they would need. You would just tell them the difficulty number. So you just tell them your target number is 23 for this encounter, this social conflict. And then you wouldn't tell the players, but you need 5 or 4 and you can't get 2 failures to kind of help build the story and suspense. Success and failure. If the players achieve the required number of successes before they acquire a number of failures listed, they succeed and get what they bargained for. However, if they get more failures than the threshold, a consequence happens. So this is up to the Fabler and should be appropriate to the situation. If a conflict was a courtroom, the judge may rule against them. In a tribal chieftain's negotiation, it may lead to a skirmish conflict. But generally speaking, the players do not get what they want and something bad happens. This is if they fail the check. If they get enough successes and failures to pass both thresholds, they will succeed on the task, but will also suffer a consequence in return. This is left to the Fabler based on the circumstances of the conflict, but the consequence should never undo the success of the conflict. So if you are in if you were, using the tribal nomads, the tribal chieftain example, if you both succeeded and failed at the same time, it shouldn't be, and you're trying to convince them to join you on an alliance. The consequence should not be they refuse. It should be they accept, but maybe they're going to demand a higher payment to join, or maybe they're going to demand a favor in return that wasn't originally agreed upon. So the consequence, if you both succeed and fail, should never cancel each other out. They should be basically hand in hand. And then we also have an intrigue, basically a verbal duel. This is another extensive system for basically beating your opponent down with words. It is not completed yet, and I have a lot of work to do on this, so we're going to skip it for now. All right, everyone's favorite, progression systems. So it is an XP-based system. However, it's drastically simplified from other traditional fantasy RPGs. So you get XP on very set goals that you accomplish during a session. You get 1 XP for every hour you play. Essentially, you can level up by farming if you really want to, or by having shopping sprees and shopping adventures. You don't have to always fight stuff. So you get 1 XP for every hour of play in the session. You gain 1 XP for defeating 1 or more worthy monsters in an adventure. Essentially, if you fight an appropriate CR, which I don't have CR, but if you fight a tough monster, you get an XP if you defeat it. You get 1 XP if you discover a new area or explore a new area. And you get 1 XP if you resolve a conflict without violence. So these bottom 3 are quite literally rewarding you for beating something in combat, using the exploration, and using the social skills. So it's kind of incentivizing you to have a little bit of everything in the adventure, plus just 1 XP for every hour you play, just for participating in the game and whatever you might come across it. Now, that might not sound like much when, in certain games you need like 3,000 to hit level 2. But in this one, it's 10 plus your level. So at level 1, you need 11 XP. At level 2, you need 12. At level 3, you need 13. Now, this resets to 0 each time. So when you gain a level, you earn XP equal to your current level plus 10. For a level 1 character, you earn 11 for their level plus 10. To reach level 2. At level 4, you would need 15. That would be 15 additional. So I guess you don't go to 0. It's actually additional. So you start at 0. You need 11 to get to level 1. Then you actually need 23, 36, and 50. But you're already at the time. So you're going to increase the amount required by 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Alternatively, there's a 10 session campaign. This is almost directly influenced by 13th Age's system. It's you plan a 10 session adventure and you level up at the end of every session. Just straight up level up regardless of what happened. It's a good way to kind of get through quick story arcs, to just test the system, see how how different levels play and how your character gets more powerful and learn new abilities. So that's a fun way of playing. There's a short story arc or even a complicated story arc, but making it very easy to track and not have to do all this. And then something else I'm working on is a lineage system. So it's a new game plus mode, basically. I have a couple options because I'm not sure which one I want to go with, but right now when you reach level 10 and gain enough XP to advance again, in which case it would be plus 25, you have the choice of starting a lineage where you reset to level 1. Your equipment carries over to the next game. Any skills in which you have at least one rank are reduced to rank 1 and count as class skills for the next game, and you can choose a new call-in. So let's say you got to level 10 on a story arc as a mercenary or a fighter, and then you got the extra 25 XP needed, and then you decided to create a lineage. Now you could call this a descendant. You could have it as the child of your character. You could have they just basically had their memory wiped and are exploring new areas. They could just go on a new adventure. But basically you pick a different call-in and you start at level 1 with all the abilities, but you keep everything else you had. So you keep your equipment, you keep all your skills are reduced to rank 1 for mechanical balance, but they now become class skills. So if the mercenary has athletics, acrobatics, and carousing as their skills, and you went to play as an envoy, which is like a cleric that don't have those skills, now you do have those skills in addition to everything you gain as the envoy. The second option, so that basically allows for infinite leveling without breaking the math too badly. So that was my first option. Option 2 is you choose an additional call-in in which to train with a few minor changes. You start at level 1 in that call-in, but you're still level 10 basically. So all your skill ranks are still left alone, all your talents are acquired, your prowess remains at 5, but you basically start leveling up a new system using this XP for everything. So it's always going to be 25 XP to gain a level, and then you'd be a mercenary 10 and an envoy 1, and then a mercenary 10 and an envoy 2, but you're still considered level 10 for the prowess, so your prowess bonus number goes to plus 5. And you can't put more than 10 ranks into any skill. That's again just to balance the math behind it. The other option is, or if you do option 2 and you decide to take a new talent or new call-in, you can also choose to basically extend your training in your current call-in and specialize in it. So if you stay in your current call-in, then you get a different set where each additional level you get 3 talent points to spend. You get skill ranks according to the call-in's base plus your logic. And then you gain the vitae and everything else as if you had gained a level. But your ribbon feature is specific to each one. So the ribbon feature goes up by a set value depending on it. So like excuse me. So we'll say the knave, they get an additional d6 sneak attack every odd level. So at level 11, at 13, at 15, at 17, etc. Or the warden, which is essentially my version of the barbarian, gets +1 rage damage, fury damage every level. So if you specialize it instead of taking a new one, you kind of get other cool expansions on your abilities. Next section, we got some miscellaneous rules. This is very much a narrative rule. Essentially, you can make a bargain and you critically succeed your next check, but a massive drawback happens at some point in the session. and there's some details there. Equipment, pretty standard fantasy style equipment. You got your weapons, your ranged armor, shields, groups, features, uh, options for that. Creatures. So I'm trying to condense the creature types. Excuse me. So instead of being like, so kind of condense them. So you got weirds, which are your supernatural and otherworldly creatures. Your undead, your aberrations, your oozes. You got beasts, and mammals. Humanoids, Empyreans are beings of the celestial or the fallen realms. Your aeons, your daemons, your nephilim, your giants, etc. Your primordials are beings of elemental nature, primals, elementals, Ephraidi, etc. Your constructs are creatures of beings of mechanical or artificial nature. They are not living but can be sentient. So your gear forge, your constructs, your mechs, your monstrous monstrosities, strange amalgamations and bizarre creatures that are extremely abnormal, including creatures such as half breeds of minotaurs, werewolves, yetis, etc. Dragons, fays, and plants. So, like down here, an example would be the Sphinx. It would be a weird Empyrean because they are both celestial but also otherworldly. And then back in the character creation, there was mentors. One of the questions was, who was your mentor? And this is just the list of mentors, and they basically all give you, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. They just give you a small boon or basically a once a session bonus on the skill checks or narrative arcs. Yeah, so that's kind of the fast-ish hour and 46 minutes rundown on the Fables of Eternity. So thank you for sitting through all of that and listening to my rambling. I will try and get like a link to the Discord and eventually a quick start guide put up in the descriptions. I have a lot of work left to do on this, and I'm hoping to make this more of a regular development stream. But until that happens, I will talk to you all later. So thank you again, and we will have a great night.